let's get another question on. Let's go second page. We'll go
There was
to
one guy who
Go to
DM'd me.
Ravioli.
His name was the same Nick Fuentes, however you say it, but 2020 at the end. He was in the Discord saying he wanted to talk.
Well, I know Ravioli has had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to Ravioli because
Okay.
she had her hand up for a while. You're unmuted.
Okay, hi. So I'm gonna try and make this as quick as possible. I understand your views. I understand where you're coming from. But if we just block immigration completely, we're banning a lot of good people from coming in. I'm not saying like all of them are good, but for example, my dad, he's retired Navy. My uncle, he's a bioengineer. My aunt, she's a nurse. And I live in California, right? It's very diverse, but almost all of the immigrant families that I know are in a good job that benefit our society, like a doctor or a lawyer or in the Navy. Like, there's a lot of immigrants benefiting our country. And I understand where you're coming from. But if you ban immigration, you're also banning people coming in from changing America for the better. And I agree with, I forgot who said it earlier, but America, I believe, was made for people to come in to find refuge. I don't think I'm making sense. I might be making sense. I don't know. I want to know.
No, I understand your question. It's a valid question. It's a good question. But the question is, who is America for? And, why do we have a country? Because what I'm hearing in a lot of these questions is the presupposition that, and I understand, but it's the perspective of the outsider, the foreigner. Well, what about these good foreigners, these good people from other countries who come here and make America better? What about people who want a job in America? But I'm sitting here, and that's why it's called America First, wondering, what about the good people in America? What about the people in America and what's good for them? And so certainly if we shut down immigration, there would be people deprived of opportunity or good people coming over here. But what's lost on a lot of people is that, for one argument that's made, and this is an example, is they will say that if you increase immigration, then GDP goes up. If you increase immigration, then the economy grows bigger and everybody's better off. But what they don't point out is that these numbers are actually different. That's the whole pie. But when we look at the natives versus the immigrants, the people that benefit and create that net benefit from immigration are the immigrants themselves. What is involved in that increase in value and that transfer is that the native population gets poorer while the immigrants get richer. And I don't think it's right that the government is looking out for the interests and the benefit of immigrants or foreigners instead of our own people. Because, while people may come over here and do a lot of great things, you have to understand that there's a finite number of jobs. And so when you bring workers over here and bring labor over here, wages go down. That's one example. And so is our government, is it a good government that says we will sacrifice the interest of our own people for the benefit of people in another country? Let those governments look out for their people. Let the other, why doesn't Mexico look out for Mexico's people? Why does our government look out for Mexico's people when their government doesn't? Who's looking out for us? And that's where I come at it from. So
wait, real quick though, isn't it when, so let's say you're talking about immigrants, whatnot. If an immigrant comes over here legally and is deemed a U.S. citizen, isn't it then they're American, right? So if they're getting jobs or whatnot, isn't America still technically looking after their own people?
Well, I mean, I think that's sort of a technical way to look at it. I mean, if somebody comes over here and they have a baby, they become a naturalized U.S. citizen because of birthright citizenship. I mean, is that really like a fair way to say that they're an American? I mean, does citizenship equate with, American identity? If somebody has their baby,
I'm not talking about like a legal immigrant.
I mean, if you're raised as a child,
I'm talking about in that moment.
Somebody that goes through the immigration, right? The immigration process, actually, like you could say a legal immigrant, and therefore they come in, right, and they get a job. Aren't they technically still part of America, even if they're only deemed an American citizen as of like a day ago? So
in a legal sense, but the point would remain the same. But the point would remain the same, that the native population that is already here and has been, if we're talking about from a point zero, you've got a person who is here and an immigrant, we're talking about the end result, but every immigrant comes from another country. So, I mean, they may come from another country and benefit at the expense of a native, but I mean, does that mean that, oh, well, everybody's better off? I mean, no, the person that was a native and in the country and an American lost, And the person that came over from somewhere else and, then they got naturalized and so on, they won. But does that make it any less different that one is a foreigner and one is a native? I mean, you could say that after 1 million years, that's the case, but what matters after 1 million years?
So out of curiosity, you mentioned that legal immigrants come and they're successful, and that could take away from American citizens. Do you think that could have anything to do with legal immigrants working harder than American citizens?
No, I'm not even talking about individual
This is a
cases.
general,
I'm just talking generally that, we're not talking about, well, they're going to get advancement. I'm saying that if you look at labor economics, it's very simple supply and demand stuff. The more that you have of something, the less it is worth. This is supply and demand. And labor, like any other good, is subject to the laws of supply and demand. The more labor that you have, the bigger the supply, the lower the price. In other words, the lower the wage. And just think about a very simple example. If Walmart and Target have to compete for a small number of workers, how are they going to compete for a small number of workers? They're going to offer higher wages. Well, if you work for us, I'll give you benefits, or if you work for us, I'll pay you a higher hourly wage. What if there are so many workers that Walmart and Target have more than enough to go around? Well, they're going to lower wages. They're going to say, oh, you don't like your job? You're totally expendable. There's 100 people waiting in line for your job. And that's essentially what has happened to both high and low skilled workers in this country for 50 years, is that all workers have become expendable, because if a company thinks they can get an advantage, they will import workers, high or low skill, to take American jobs. And that is that is why you have low wages. That is why middle class is shrinking. So it's not necessarily about working harder or not. It's just a matter of, having a limited number of jobs and supply and demand.
So I would like to point something out with that. I'm a farmer. I grew up on a farm. I now work in politics. Growing up do you know the percentage that the average American spends on their food a year?
No.
Like based on a percentage of their income? I don't have the exact document, but we pay a lower percentage of our income on food, just on basic necessities, than any other country in the developed world. Now, part of that is because we have laborers that are willing to do things for cheaper. And just coming from the perspective of a farmer, it's a lot easier to hire someone, and a lot better off for the business of the farmer and for the American people, so they aren't spending as much of their money on their food, to hire someone that may be here with a green card to come and harvest a crop. Decreasing the amount of immigrants and the amount of people that are here working holding green cards would end up hurting America more because of the amount of cost increases that it would create. Not to mention, if we have most businesses, if they have to increase wages, they're just going to modernize and put in kiosks or other ways to limit unskilled labor, to where they don't have to raise they don't have to increase their costs on their customers, so they can continue providing that good or service. So I guess my point here is that I can see your point, but I can also see where your point becomes invalid when we start discussing the modernization of industry and how technology comes into play as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because agriculture is really interesting to me. Agriculture is, a lot of people, I would say, and maybe you could tell me if this is right or wrong, but I know people that work in agriculture and will work in politics, and they deal with agriculture. And they tell me that, the perception of farmers in America is like Farmer Brown tending to his fields. And generally farming is a lot of factory farming and major industry, big business type stuff.
There's no such thing as a factory farm.
Oh, okay, right.
There's high density agriculture, but there is no such thing as a factory farm.
Got it. Okay. So you just have like big industrial, big holdings, conglomerates, but right. We quibble with the language. But in any case, the point being is, when we're talking about farmers, we're not talking about like a farmer with a small plot of land and so on. I mean, we're talking about big business.
85% of farms in this country are owned by families.
Yeah.
They are family farms.
Well, family. Well, what I mean, who is not in a family? Everybody's a family.
No, but like they might supply to somebody, but half those things like they're just like literally like family oriented. Like you got the cousins and whatnot there. Ain't no like big old Amazon of farming. Those don't exist.
All right. So does agriculture have a massive lobby? Does agriculture get massive subsidies, or is that not true?
Well, they get Unfortunately, they do get subsidies as a form of
Gotcha.
price control.
And is that because
came
of
in
lobbying? Is that because of big agriculture lobbying?
well, I mean, that came in under the Roosevelt administration because the price of corn dropped so low.
Well, you
I
have it,
don't,
right?
I don't necessarily agree with subsidies.
I
We've never
don't
gotten
have a
subsidy in
lobbyist.
my life
My family doesn't have a lobbyist. But the
Well,
point
neither
I'm
does
trying to
mine,
make,
because
point
we
I'm
raise
trying to
chickens and
make,
apples.
your industry has a lobbyist.
All industries have a lobbyist.
Gotcha. The point I'm trying to make is that agriculture is one of the biggest fat cats that there is. And a lot of conservatives like to talk about, you know, the farmer and all this kind of stuff, but, or even things like welfare or whatever, bailouts. But agriculture is one of the biggest fat cats, one of the biggest beneficiaries of welfare in the country in the form of subsidies. They have big lobbyists. And I just want to point that out because a lot of people like to say that, well, oh no, it's this sort of idyllic, like pastoral thing. It's not
It's
that
anything
way.
but idyllic.
Okay. Especially not politically is the point. And when you're talking about workers, when you're talking about illegal farm workers, you're talking about probably the biggest incidence of migrants taking American jobs. You're talking about lower costs, but what does this come at the price of? Primarily, and firstly, like you said, it comes at the cost of American workers. We could pay Americans a higher wage to do the jobs that illegals do, but farmers would like to pay a lower wage and often break the law and hire illegals to do the same job. And I understand there's visas and there's all kinds of things that have been done to help them cut corners, but agriculture is one of the biggest hypocrisies that, and I hear all this kind of stuff from, and I know because I was in politics, from Republicans that are against welfare and they're constitutionalists, but agriculture gets all this welfare and they hire illegals. And by the way, though, the cost isn't just in terms of jobs. That's one of the best examples of you could hire Americans for a higher wage, but instead you hire foreigners for a lower wage, and maybe you save a little bit, maybe the Americans save a little bit. I'd prefer to pay a little bit more and have Americans working, but even beyond that, the cost is greater. Did you know, you ever hear the story about Molly Tibbetts? Molly Tibbetts was a young girl. I think she was 19 years old in Iowa, and she was murdered by an illegal immigrant, chopped up. And it turned out that illegal immigrant, it was very much similar to Kate Steinle. The illegal immigrant that killed her was working in a dairy plant. And that dairy plant that he worked at was owned by one of the biggest donors to the Republican Party in Iowa. And to me, that is a horrible tragedy, but that is a perfect example of what is going on in the Republican Party and everything that I oppose. Because certainly these people that they're bringing in are cheaper and they're better for the bottom line. And I'm sure that some of that benefit goes towards the American people. We save a little bit of money.
It does definitely
or a lot
go
money.
towards the American consumer.
When we buy our groceries. But at what cost? At what cost? And that goes back to that question, or that phrase rather. We wanted workers, we got people. We wanted people to pick our berries, or we wanted people to work in the fields, or we wanted people to work in the dairy plant, but we didn't get workers, we got people. We got people that are bringing drugs, like Donald Trump said, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. And by the way, I don't think the economic cost is justified. I don't think any of the cost is justified. How about instead of bringing over migrant workers, we could say we will not bring over murderers or drug dealers or rapists or even just straight up workers. We'll hire American people and we'll pay a little bit more. I would be fine with paying a little bit more. America is a rich country. We are a wealthy country, and we need to start looking out for our producers and our workers and not just the consumers, because that's a big problem with conservative economics. This is primarily concerned with the consumers. Never mind all these towns that have been destroyed in the heartland of the country because the factories and manufacturing has gone overseas. Forget about that. We need cheap LCDs. We want cheap televisions. Well, tell all the people that are killing themselves or dying of opioids because their town was hollowed out and destroyed that it was worth it because now I can go and buy a 52-inch TV for $300. I don't think it's worth it. And that's what we have to talk about is trade-offs. Might you pay a little bit more? Certainly. Is it worth it in both the social and economic costs? Absolutely. And that's what America First is about. Not profit first, not consumers first, not immigrants first, Americans first. And that includes workers, not just consumers.
But I would also counter that by saying, I like I said, I grew up on a farm. I grew up in a farming community. And I honestly have yet to see any large number of immigrant or a migrant worker that was actually not better well behaved than most Americans, because as part of us keeping some of these green card holders in our employ, we'd provide them with a place to live and they would keep that place spotless. There was hardly any ever, I don't even think we ever had any incidents of drug use. I think the most that we could ever say is sometimes they had a few too many beers, but that's just anyone. So, I mean, I think that you're talking about an overwhelming minority of people when they immigrate, and this is not so much focused towards people that are illegal as it is people that come here legally by saying that they're bringing crime with them. And, you know, I do take issue with some of the things that you have said about agriculture, because there are a lot of farmers that would not be able to function without some of the government programs, because you have to have crop insurance if your crop fails. Otherwise, you lose thousands of acres of land. Now, do I think that other things should be subsidized? No, but we do have to. Our food supply is a national security issue, because if we do not have a decent, affordable food supply, that's the first thing that can lead to some sort of revolution or some sort of uprising.
Not importing a population of barbarians from across the border. That's, I mean,
How are they barbarians?
I understand what you're saying,
look, the
but
Cato Institute did a study, and they found that if
Here
you
we go
take
with the
away
Cato
like them
Institute.
crossing the border thing, like they commit like less crimes than natural born citizens once they're here. They commit crimes at a lower rate.
that's not true. That's
Yes,
not
it is true.
That data from the Cato Institute is self-reported. If you're looking at John Lott, a criminologist who looks at pre-sentencing data, they commit a vastly disproportionate amount in Arizona and in other states. So the data, the
Just
methodology you're
Arizona. I
talking
know
about
Which
is
are
wrong,
not,
and that's
which are not
because-
agricultural areas.
and that is because
You can't just look at Arizona. It's the entire country.
And that is because the Cato Institute is a libertarian think tank that is funded by big business. American Enterprise Institute, Cato Institute, they're all the same. They're getting paid to write this kind of stuff. And, you know, you look at, and even like Amnesty International, our government, they will tell you that the rape rate on the border is like 70%. Of women illegally crossing the border, 70% of them get raped. And like, who's doing the raping down there? It's coyotes, it's illegal immigrants. And the crime rate is spiking in Arizona and California, all over. And it's because of illegal immigrants. And you know, maybe you live on a farm or something, but I live a little bit outside of Chicago. And I can tell you that you don't want to be caught in certain neighborhoods after dark in Chicago. And these are the people that we're bringing over. And you could say that, well, the farmer ones are, you know, they're much more well behaved. But I can assure you that anybody who lives near one of these neighborhoods could tell you and paint a very different picture of a different standard of living and a different quality of life.